For CBS Sports at the Real Mike KB. He appears via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. The Sixers are swept out. By all indication, Brett Brown will be fired. And we will talk about that and more. What is next for this organization moving forward? The word accountability has come up a lot. Josh Richardson brought it up. Tim Legler brought it up last week. We've heard a lot about it. Al Horford mentioned that he wasn't really told his role. He was frustrated with the lack of communication. And there's a lot of other examples. So, MKB, we got a lot to dive into here. First off, the sweep. I mean, obviously, when Simmons goes down, I really, and look, I liked Boston this year. I liked Boston better this year than I liked last year. I was giving the Sixers the benefit of the doubt that their size in this playoff roster, hey, we're built for the playoffs. I was giving them the benefit of the doubt to show me that, and they were wrong. They did not have a playoff roster here. So I'll ask you, biggest issue with this team from today moving forward is what?
Honestly, it's one thing you have Joel and Ben locked up on decent, good contracts moving forward, but you really handicapped yourself in terms of how you can improve the roster around them by, signing Al Horford and Tobias Harris to those contracts last summer and then having them underperform in such a way this year. Not only are the contracts bad, but also now that it's coming off of a season where, it was really amplified that the guys, weren't living up to those contracts, and it's going to be especially hard to find, potential trade partners that might be interested in taking on those deals.
Yeah, obviously they are really hamstrung with those two deals there. Let's go to, obviously everybody is kind of anticipating that the coach is getting fired. How likely is that to happen?
I think it's just a matter of time at this point, Mike, unfortunately, because, you and I both obviously have dealt with Brett over the years and we like him and he's a good guy. But at this point, it just seems that, there's no, I think Woj put it yesterday in a tweet, there's no internal momentum for him to return, which is, basically the same thing that I've been hearing over the past couple of weeks leading into the postseason. It was a point last year after that Raptors series where there was questions about whether or not he was going to be back, and they brought him back and gave him another opportunity, and they spent a ton of money in, free agency last offseason, and obviously things didn't work out, whether, that doesn't all fall on Brett's shoulders, but in the NBA, that's the coach is always the first guy to go. So it's going to be, I was actually told yesterday that the news could come potentially as early as today that they'd be moving on. It hasn't happened yet, but from everything I've heard, it's just a matter of time at this point.
What about Elton Brand? It seems like the real issues start above him, but do you think that he's safe for next season?
Yeah, that's the problem too, Hunter, and that's a big issue. Firing Brett Brown will only do so much to help this team put itself in better position to contend moving forward. And from everything that I've heard and from other reports that are starting to come out this week is that Elton Brand is safe within the organization. There's, I haven't heard of any plans to move on from him and go complete overhaul. I think the changes in terms of the structure is going to stop at the head coach, which, that could be a problem for the team moving forward. Like I said, Brett isn't blameless in all of this, but he certainly isn't the only person that deserves a slice of the pie of the blame. So, it's going to be an interesting dynamic. But from what I've heard, Elton is safe at least for this offseason.
How much of the problems that this team have is even above both Brett Brown and Elton Brand? I mean, figuring out who makes the decisions in this organization and who kind of greenlights. I mean, somebody had to okay Tobias Harris getting that mega contract. Someone had to okay Al Horford. I mean, does Elton Brand say, hey, I got a great idea, let's do these moves, or is he kind of pushed into those moves?
There should definitely be top-down accountability, Mike. Obviously, there's no way to force, ownership to sell the team, but that's definitely, if you look at some of the tweets from fans on Twitter and some of the reactions, that's definitely a sentiment among the fan base that, ownership has kind of let this team down, and it's definitely true, dating back all the way to the time of, when they initially brought Sam Hinkie in, and then halfway through allowing him to, do exactly what he stated that he was going to do from the outset. They got cold feet and were, let outside influence, impact their internal decision making, which then in turn led to Hinkie being outed and Colangelo coming in and that entire debacle, and then Brand replacing Colangelo. It was an entire string of events that points directly to the top. And I think part of the situation that the ownership has never been, directly hands-on. Obviously, these guys, Josh Harris and the Blitzer company, they have their hands in a lot of different things. Even just in the sports world, they're involved in several franchises, and then there are other, the things that they pursue outside of the sports world. And it just seems that, the Sixers have been doing well in terms of the box office and financially over the past few years, and that's, it seems to me, and I think to a lot of other people, that that's really all that's mattered to this organization. They bought the team for, whatever they bought it for almost a decade ago, and it's worth much more now. And there's, some questions about whether or not winning a championship is really the main goal for that ownership group, or if it's just, making money. And I think that's that's a fair question to wonder about moving forward with this franchise.
Is there a coach out there that really intrigues you for this team? I know that there's been some conversations out there, Ty Lue, Jay Wright, but we've been hearing Jay Wright, it seems, every single offseason. Anyone out there that stands out to you?
At this point, Hunter, not to sound super pessimistic, but not really. And that's something that I've said, that one of the issues, not issues, I understand when it's time to move on from a coach and new voice is needed. But that was one of the things that I always said when people would bring up replacing Brett Brown. If there was people that I felt that were waiting in the wings that were, would obviously be a better choice, and you could point to and say 100%, like, this coach will do a better job, that would be one thing. But the way that it is right now, there's not one that really jumps off the paper to me. Now, that's not to say that, maybe Jay Wright would do a great job, but we don't know. Ty Lue is another name that came out, and, potentially he would do a good job, but no LeBron James here. And, his success in the NBA has been completely tied to having LeBron on his team. So, there's just a lot of question marks for all the names that are popping up. If you want to, elevate one of the assistants that's already on the bench, that already has some familiarity with the players on the team, that's another, potential option. But then, you don't know how any of these guys would perform as a head coach. So to me, it's, it's a situation where I think they're going to want to bring in a veteran, a guy that has experience and could potentially command the locker room. But there just doesn't seem to be a lot of those guys available, on the market. Both of Van Gundy's names pop up, and maybe that's, a direction they could potentially look to go in. But it's just at this point, there's not a whole lot of coaches just waiting around for NBA gigs that I think can immediately come in and transform this team into be, better than what it has been.
I mean, you look at this roster, Michael, and as you mentioned, they're kind of hamstrung. It does. Are you confident that they could get a different coach and win with? In other words, did Brett do a good job with the roster he was given, or could they have gotten more from this team?
I do think they could have gotten more at times. At the end of the day, the injury issues they dealt with throughout the season, I think, were a huge issue, and not to, continue to point that to the Sixers as an excuse for Brett. But it is something that he dealt with, basically over the course of his entire tenure. And it's really not easy to construct a game plan and rotations when, you don't necessarily know if, not even like rotation players, but your best guys, you're the guys that you build the whole plan around are going to be there, or they're going to be there, and then all of a sudden they're not there. And I think that's very difficult. But with that said, I do think there were subtle adjustments that could have been made throughout the season to maximize the guys that wasn't necessarily done. The most obvious being, moving Al Horford out of that starting lineup. But from what I have heard, there was obviously pushback on that earlier in the season from higher up. That's something that maybe Brett wanted to explore a little bit earlier than he actually ultimately did end up exploring, later in the season. But obviously after the front office had just signed, Horford to that 4-year, $100+ million contract 2 months later to say, okay, we just signed him, but now he has to come off the bench for us. That wasn't something that, the front office really wanted to pursue. So I think that he was kind of hamstrung in a certain way with that. But overall, if this team doesn't change, say if the roster is exactly the same and they just bring in a different coach, I don't think the outcome will be much different. Maybe, a couple more wins here or there based off some rotations or game plan switches that Brett was a little slow to make. But otherwise, I think he was handicapped by this roster, and I think any, coach that comes in will be too.
Michael Kaskey Blomain, CBS Sports, covers the NBA and the Sixers. Which of the two guys, Harris, Horford, is more likely to get moved? Which one has more value? Which one's more movable?
I think it's Al Horford for a couple of reasons, Mike. I think the Sixers would, if they had their druthers, I think he would be the one that moves. Harris, although he has underperformed greatly, he still technically kind of fits the mold of what this team needs. A wing scorer that when he's making his shots, obviously he's capable of spacing the floor, putting the ball on the floor. And also the year difference in contracts. After this season now, Tobias still has 4 years on the deal. Al has 3. And from what I've heard, at least, there's teams across the league that still view Al as, a veteran big man that's capable of coming in and producing in the right role. I think a lot of teams understand that, obviously he's on the downward part of his career, but he was in a unique situation this year that didn't maximize his talent. And I think a lot of the teams around the league realize that doesn't necessarily mean that would be the case anywhere. If they took him and put him, as a center that he likes to play in the role that he's comfortable with, he could still be a productive player. So I do think there will be, a market for Al. With that said, the Sixers will obviously have to sweeten the pot to, get someone to probably take that contract. Teams know that they'll have leverage when it comes to making a potential deal with the Sixers, given that they'll be, pretty much desperate to get rid of these deals. So it's going to take, some other pieces to get a deal done. But I think Al Horford is, very likely to be moved this offseason.
All right, we'll leave you with this. Michael Kaskey Blomain at the Real Mike KB on Twitter. Chances they split up Embiid and Simmons, and if they did, which one would stay and which one would go?
I would say the chances of that are really low, Mike. I think that they do realize that out of all the, mistakes that have been made within this organization over the past few years, landing those two guys were really the two things that stick out as positives and promising things. And the hardest thing when you're building a championship contender in the NBA today is acquiring that superstar level talent. Two all-star, potentially superstar caliber players in their early to mid-20s don't end up on, the same franchise at the same time very often. And I think, at the very least, we've talked about this before, the Sixers are very interested in bringing in a new voice in terms of a head coach to work with both of those guys. And Brett's the only guy that they've ever played for professionally, before they split either one of those up. So I would be, I guess shocked, for lack of a better word, if either of those guys were moved this offseason. But if one was moved, I would say it would probably be Ben, just based off, how committed this organization has been to Joel. But that's purely speculation. I would be very surprised if either one of those guys was moved this summer or this offseason.
It should be interesting. The plane lands in about an hour, or takes off in about an hour, or something like that. So we could hear something by the end of the day. And if you do, keep it locked here to the Sports Bash. MKB, always a pleasure, pal.
For sure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yep, and he, like all guys, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.